So if you didn't see my previous video, we finally gotten our first build planners for Borderlands 4. You'll find these at maxroll.com. So I wanted to start doing some theory crafting or some potential builds with the information we currently have for Borderlands 4. Keep in mind, we only have the VEX and Rafa skill trees. Also, these build planners don't have the increases when you put points into any of these sections. So usually with Borderlands 4, if you put, say, 5 out of 5 points compared to 1 out of 5 points, the stat increases will scale in a linear fashion. So this gives melee damage 6%, max health capacity by 6%. Usually it will just give another 6% for every point you put into it. Maybe there would be some diminishing returns at some point for some skills, but usually it scales in that way. But we don't know the scaling for everything, so you currently don't see the increases on the build planner yet. Also keep in mind that we don't know if these skill trees are going to be the exact same on launch. We're close enough to launch where I think there's not going to be any changes to the actual functions of any of these skills or any of these passives or anything like that, but there will probably be stat tuning. So you'll see some passives with less power, some passives with more power. So keep all of that in mind. Now, I did want to start some of my theory crafted builds with single color builds, because keep in mind, there are 3 different trees for all of the Vault Hunters in Borderlands 4. They're all different colors. So there's a red, a green, and a blue for every Vault Hunter. But these skill trees are so big with so many different options that I think it's actually going to be possible to get very strong builds putting all of your points into one tree, because we're not actually going to have a ton of points on launch. It's seeming like 49 points unless there's going to be more points from other things outside of leveling up. And with that, you're actually not able to get a ton, and a large chunk of your points are actually used just to get to 1 capstone, which brings us into some basics you need to know for Borderlands 4. So first off, whatever's the main tree you're going into in Borderlands 4 is the skill you're going to be using. So for instance, for this build, we're using a Dead Ringer, which is the blue one. And this is a skill for VEX, which has 3 charges, and you get to spawn a clone minion, choosing a Spectre or a Reaper. One of them's a melee with taunt, one of them's a ranged that can't move but does a lot more damage. Phase clones lose an ever-increasing amount of health per second, and their damage type matches VEX's currently attunement when spawned. So this is her ability. Also, every Vault Hunter does have a trait that will usually play back into their builds. For VEX, it's what we just went over. Whatever element the weapon you currently have in your hand is using is what your action skill will go off of. So for your clones, if you have a poison weapon out and you spawn, say, a Reaper, it'll be a Poison Reaper. If you then switch to, say, Radiation and spawn a Spectre, it'll be a Radiation Spectre. So that's going to play a pretty big role into all VEX builds as well. Then you have augments. Usually you have 1. For this specific build we have 2, but augments are a modifier to your skill. So let's say here we have Wither. It's a minion skill. Your Spectres will now cast Wither on enemies when they spawn, dealing status effect damage over time and increasing damage for a short duration. So some of them can be additional active skills that modify your base skill in some way, or some of them are just passives like this Wither skill. Then finally, you have your capstone, which is the thing at the bottom of the tree. Also keep in mind, any augments or capstones don't take points to get. You just have to unlock that row and you freely get those for no additional cost. But our capstone is Dark Pact. VEX can now equip 2 augments. This is actually a pretty interesting one. I don't know if anybody else that we know of has this yet, and gains the ability to use Dark Pact. So this is another ability, which is also interesting because some capstones can be all passive or have an additional ability to use. So Dark Pact, press and hold F to fully restore the health of our phase clones, as well as granting them increased movement speed and minion attack speed for a duration. So this gives us 2 augments and gives us this big cooldown that just buffs up our summons really heavily. But let's go into our actual build now. And again, we're putting all 49 points into the blue tree because it seems like you'll actually be able to do that. So first off, we just have Cold Iron. VEX and our minions deal increased gun damage. Now, I'm pretty sure this is only going to work for VEX and the Spectres. Reapers, I don't think their big sights are considered guns. So this will just be for VEX and her Spectres, but I do think using Dead Ringer, the best thing to do is probably going to be to summon 1 Reaper, which is the melee with a taunt, and then 2 Spectres that probably aren't close to each other. I think that's probably going to be best. Then we have Fell Inscriptions. VEX and her minions gain increased melee damage and max health capacity, and this melee damage is probably only going to be for Reapers. Max health increase is also really good for both her and her summons. Then we're going into Portents of Suffering. VEX and her minions gain increased status effect damage. This will come into play in some of our passives, but also keep in mind, you can use different elemental weapons in and summon both your specters and reapers as different elements. You could summon 3 specters and have them all 3 be different elements. So that'll also be good because you can just summon them with elemental damage. Then we have Grave Fiends, a kill skill. Vex and our minions deal increased damage. So this should be 10% damage increase because we have all the points put into it, stacking up to 3 times. The stacks last 16 seconds. This is actually the only kill skill I took, and that's because it seems incredibly strong for a kill skill with a really long duration that is probably going to refresh, and only 3 stacks to get really big damage increase. But then for our capstone, we're obviously using Dark Pack, which is the right side. So we went over to the right. Obedient Fiends, Vex gains increased minion damage. Minion skills and command skills gain further damage increase. So just minion damage, then command damage, then minion skill damage. So just massive damage increases. It's also pretty interesting that you just get minion damage overall, then skill damage specifically. So their skills are getting double buffed here, which is going to be very strong. And then any command skill is getting basically triple buffed, which is pretty good. Then we have Ancient Rites. Vex gains a stack of Ancient Rites for each of our active minions every second, increasing minion damage. Stacks are lost after a duration with no active minion for a certain duration. So you gain 0.2% per stack. I'm presuming that this is actually 1% with the 5 points into it. Lasts 8 seconds, but that's just the duration. If you have a summon up, the duration should not reduce, and it goes up to 40 stacks. So it should be a 40% damage increase for our minions, which is pretty massive. And then we're going into a Denier. Deadringer gains an additional charge, so it'll be 4 charges now. We will actually be able to have up 4 minions because it doesn't seem like there's a limit to how many specters or reapers you can actually have up at a time. So we could do 2 reapers, 2 specters, or what I think is still probably going to be better is 3 specters and 1 reaper. Then for our capstone, we took Dark Pack, which is what we already went over. Now what's super nice about this is when we activate this, it has a 42-second cooldown, but for 12 seconds, our minions do not lose health. So they're just going to be up the whole time. And that'll help with Ancient Rites. That'll help just keeping our minions up. And it'll help get our charges back while they can't die. Because at some point, these minions without Dark Pack on them, they're just going to die at some point because they lose health over time. And that keeps stacking up the health they lose. So at some point, they're just going to die. But we just want to have charges up when they do end up dying. Then in the middle box, we're using Recurrence. Whenever Vex deals gun damage or melee damage, gain a stack of Recurrence, which increases her and her minions' gun damage and melee damage, which will buff both of our minions. And you lose your stacks if you don't gain a new one in a certain duration. It's a duration of 5 seconds, so this one is a low duration, but you just have to deal gun or melee damage, which will be always. And I'm not sure how much damage this is giving per stack, but it seems to be quite a bit of damage, and it's 50 stacks. So this will be a pretty big damage increase overall, which shouldn't be super hard to keep stacked up. But then going over to the left, we have a Prismatic Ichor. When Vex or her minions apply a status effect, apply another random status effect. And it deals 30% of the initial status effect with a cooldown of 5 seconds, but all of our minions will have that same cooldown as well, or more specifically, a separate cooldown. So we'll be able to just be applying ridiculous amount of status effects everywhere, because you could just make all 4 of your minions different elements, then you're using one. So you could all be applying that every 5 seconds, which will just apply another status effect. So it's going to be very strong. And then Keen Suffering, status effect damage, gains a chance to critically hit, which is going to be really big for a lot of other effects, but just for the damage increase. And again, we could have 4 different minions with 4 different elements on them. And then mixing that with Prismatic Ichor, we could potentially have every status effect on an enemy, every single one with now a chance to crit, which is going to be crazy. Then for our augments, we're using Hellish Harvest, a minion skill. So Reapers gain the ability to use Hellish Harvest, dealing melee damage 3 times in a large area around themselves, and they regenerate health for each enemy hit. So our Reaper or Reapers are going to survive just longer. Reapers will use Hellish Harvest on spawn. So when you spawn them, they do a big melee AoE, which will help stack up some of our passive effects and just deal a bunch of damage. And every 3rd time, they melee attack. And they gain a massive amount of their health per enemy hit. So this is just going to be massive AoE damage, keeping your Reapers alive even longer, and they'll just keep proccing it every few melee hits. So this is just going to be a very good passive augment. We already went over our other Wither skill, but what's super cool with this is Hellish Harvest is for our Reapers, so they get their own cool skill. Wither is for our Specters. So now we gave both of our summons minion skills, which I don't know if minions normally have skills at a baseline. It seems they do, but now they have different minion skills, and we have things like Obedient Fiends, where we're now double or potentially triple stacking our damage increases because we just get minion damage increase, then we also get minion skill damage. So we're just stacking more and more damage on top of our minions with this. So this build is going to be very heavily focused around our minions just staying alive, dealing crazy amounts of damage, being able to apply a bunch of status effects, and spamming out their different skills. And then as we're actually playing, we're just going to be helping to stack up other passives and help buff our minions even more. So this build is really going to be the kind of pure summoner build, because even though you could go over and get trouble from Fae's familiar, this is really the more necromancer summoning playstyle. We'll be able to have 4 different charges of Dead Ringer, so we'll be able to put out 4 different summons that have their own abilities, that are getting buffed up by tons of our skills, that are applying status effects everywhere. So this is going to be a really cool build if you want that full summoner playstyle. And I do think there is going to be some really interesting effects with this, especially once we get into class mods, because one of the developers did mention that through one of our class mods, you will be able to give some of your minions, I think specifically your specters, the weapon you're using. And I'm not 100% sure if he misspoke, because there is that effect on Heirloom here, where our specters gain a copy of a VEX's currently equipped gun for a duration. It's only 8 seconds, so it's not always, and only one specter can have the gun. But I am wondering if there's just another effect on a legendary class mod that just gives all of your specters VEX's gun. If that's the case, that class mod is going to be ungodly with this build, and that may be so strong that it may want us to only use specters, meaning we would probably remove this augment and go with something else for our specters. But I still think it's probably always going to be worth to place on a Reaper so they can taunt things, so our 3 specters don't have to worry about as many enemies hitting them. That's pretty much the entirety of this theory crafted build. I want to do a lot more of these because I think this could be a really strong build, and it's only one of the skill trees. Keep in mind, we could remove a good chunk of these points and start putting them into our other trees if there's some better options. But I do think the skill trees are just so big now that one color skill trees are going to be possible. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.